Hey folks, welcome into the News 12 Now desk. Thanks for joining us here just after 10 o'clock on our Wednesday morning. Hope you guys are having a great Wednesday. We are talking about Fort Gordon housing again. The session wrapping up yesterday with Senator Ossoff, some top Army leaders, as well as a number of families who came up and spoke. A couple former Fort Gordon tenants, and then one woman who still lives on Fort Gordon, sharing her story. So our Meredith Anderson was up there, and she joins us now somewhere along I-95, I'm assuming again. So we'll bring her in here, and let me get this pulled up real quick, and there we go. Meredith, how's it going?
Hello.
Thanks for joining us. So, kind of give us a breakdown yesterday, what happened, and just yeah, we'll start with what happened.
Sure. First, I always like to start this with, I'm going to show you my driver. There's Gary, AKA MacGyver, who is able to make us live from I-95, which is still kind of amazing. The college student in me actually did a talk with some UGA students from the hotel room, giving them advice. And I said, you know, I'll always be an old dog learning new tricks because I would have been geeking out thinking, you could be live from a car back when I was in college. But let's get to the important stuff and something that really just has stayed with me. I really wanted to know yesterday after hearing at the session about a particular situation where there was a life-threatening incident involving natural gas, and it was touched on. It was um, the Secretary Rachel Jacobson discussed it and holding the Army accountable, but we never really got the details. Well, this morning I've been going through Senator Ossoff's report that he released along with this oversight session, and we got more details, and it made me gasp. Nick, you were in a morning meeting with the staff, and I thought my mic was muted, and it wasn't, and I said, "Oh my gosh!" And that's what I was referring to. Let me tell you what happened. It was a woman who was in her home on post. She was taking a nap on her couch, and her smartwatch alerted her to a low heart rate. And so she woke up to that, and she just kind of didn't feel right. She had a headache. She felt kind of dizzy. She later smelled gas and thought, something's not right. So she called emergency services, somehow managed to stumble outside. Well, when emergency services got there, firefighters and EMS personnel, she was unconscious. Turns out maintenance workers had installed a natural gas water heater in her home and had not sealed the gas line. So this was a potentially life threatening situation. And emergency personnel found her unconscious outside her home. They rushed her to the hospital. Thank goodness she is fine. But this could have been a situation where she lost her life because of shoddy maintenance work. And for the first time, we heard yesterday the Army really, really kind of putting the hammer down on Balfour Beatty. Rachel Jacobson, the Assistant Secretary for Installations, sent Balfour Beatty a letter that basically said, hey, you could be in non-compliance with your contract with the Army providing safe and healthy housing for tenants. You need to let us know what you're going to do to fix this and moving forward. So basically, the Army put Balfour Beatty on notice that they were in violation of their contract, which means their contract could possibly be terminated. I mean, that's a pretty heavy letter from the Army. And what we have seen so far from what activists have been saying, what military families have been saying, is that Balfour Beatty's just been getting slaps on the wrist for certain things that have been happening. So this was a real threat that, hey, we can dissolve our contract with you. That to me really shows that the Army is taking this very seriously.
Almost fell
Senator
out of my
Ossoff said
chair
that
when I
yesterday
heard you
in the
talk
hearing,
about.
and he said that, he really saw some progress with the Army. I think that is proof right there that the Army is taking this very seriously. Um, the testimony yesterday, Nick, I know you listened in on the session. Heartbreaking. Some of the things that we heard, and it's amazing to me that some of this is still going on. I mean, the hearing that we've talked about this so many times in 2019 when it kind of came to a head, and Congress got involved, and then we had the hearing last year. But all of these things that were talked about yesterday, these aren't old problems. These were problems that have happened since that PSI investigation. These are problems that happened since all of this has been brought to light. And one of the women who testified yesterday, Joy Vieira, we actually introduced you to her last summer. The I team spoke with her. I believe we have her interview yesterday. We spoke with her after the session, and Nick, let's hear from her, and we'll play our interview in its entirety so you can hear her reaction to everything that happened yesterday.
Sure. So before we do, just want to let everybody know it's about 9 minutes. So if you want to listen into that, that's how long it's going to be. And then once that's done, we'll pop back in and keep talking. So again, this is Joy Vieira, one of the women who spoke yesterday and someone we've talked to before about this matter. So we'll play that now.
Our situation is a lot better. We are no longer at Fort Gordon. My husband finished his schooling, and that took us to a new duty station. Our housing situation is a lot better. There are still families like on our base that are dealing with housing issues, but we have been fortunate to have a safe house this time.
There's no poop?
No
dripping?
poop coming from the ceiling, no mold in the vents.
Can you, when you look back at that time, I mean, can you believe that that happened?
There are some moments where it feels like it just happened, and then there's moments where it's like, oh my gosh, like it has been almost a full year, but it's still, I have those moments like, did that really happen to us, or was that just like a really bad nightmare?
I mean, you have the video of it.
I have a video of it, yes. Video and pictures and emails between Balfour Beatty and, yeah.
Are you glad that you took the video? And because it's almost unbelievable.
Yeah.
You almost have to see it to believe it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I feel like taking that video led us here today. And I was able to document in that moment, which I have no clue how I was able to do that when I had poop coming from our ceiling. But I was able to document in that moment and just show the extent of what was happening. And because I was able to do that, I'm able to be here today to speak up for other families that are having these same issues, that end up having to stay in those situations because they have no other options. And that to me is absolutely heartbreaking, because no family, especially our military families, should have to be subjected to that.
How did you feel coming here today? I mean, I know you spoke out once and you talked to the I team, but it's a different ballgame when you're talking.
This is, yes. I was so nervous because I said to Ashley and Aaron, I said, it's a very heavy weight, because I am not just carrying my story. I am carrying with me stories of multiple other families on Fort Gordon or like across the country that are dealing with these same exact issues. So I didn't come here speaking just for my family. I came here speaking for other families, and that was such a heavy weight, because I wanted to do justice to these situations. So I was very nervous.
But I don't hear you say you were afraid of retaliation, and I know so many families are afraid of that.
Oh yeah. So I've said before, like, us witnesses have painted a target on our backs. We absolutely have. When we were at Fort Gordon after our last interview, housing representatives that were supposed to be representing our families completely stopped speaking to me. And I feel like that just shows where their true loyalties lie. I had remarks made to me from Balfour Beatty. My husband I will say his chain of command there was great. So I have fortunately not had to face retaliation from them, but definitely felt repercussions from housing officials at Fort Gordon and Balfour Beatty.
Do you regret speaking out?
Nope, I absolutely do not. I can't, because this is too important of an issue to keep quiet about. And unfortunately, there are a lot of families that Balfour Beatty is having sign non-disclosure agreements, and so they can't speak out. And I'm going to keep using my voice to give a voice to the other people that don't have the ability to get their voices heard.
You got upset when you were talking about your daughter not having access to her medical supplies. I mean, that was as a mom, that was hard to listen to, because I think we all can relate to feeling so helpless and not being able to help your child, whether it be a medical situation or just, when they really need you or they really need something and you can't, your hands are tied.
Yes.
I mean, that just goes to show you that this goes beyond, oh, I'm in a hotel, or oh, it's inconvenient. I mean, for her and for your family, it was dangerous.
Yeah, it was life-saving equipment that I originally thought I overpacked, because they had told us we would have a house as soon as we got there. And then come to find out we did not have enough. And not being able to see certain things that I knew were going on in her body, not being able to see that and react. I started losing sleep. It impacted us on so many different levels, and it was very scary, very scary. Thankfully, we were able to get an emergency supply, but I can't put into words the fear that I felt, feeling like now I really can't protect my child.
Man, I can't imagine that. On top of being stressed in a hotel with your son, with 2 dogs, and your husband, you're watching him be stressed.
Yep.
I mean, you were talking about morale and that being a problem, not just, obviously with your family. Do you think that if they don't get this right, our national security is going to suffer?
Oh, for sure. As we heard today, there is already a problem with retention. I've seen it on a broader perspective because of my husband's last unit that he was in. But what it boils down to is, if the families are not safe and happy, it does not matter how much training these soldiers have. It does not matter how much money is put into their training. They will not stay, because ultimately their families are everything to them. That's why they're fighting. That is what they are fighting for. So when their families are not safe and have a safe living environment, that almost takes out their reason for staying in.
Do you leave here today feeling hopeful that things are going to get better?
Yes. I think, I am so thankful to Senator Ossoff, because he keeps shining this light, and he's refusing to let it go. And it, just like he kept saying, what are we doing to ensure that we're not finding ourselves back here? And I think that ultimately that question is the most important question, because quite frankly, I don't care what their paperwork says, because you can put anything on paper. What you can't put on paper is these videos. These videos are showing what is happening. And so Erin was saying her situation, things happened as early as this month, or frequent as this month. And so obviously certain things aren't changing. So what now? Where do we go from here? But I am hopeful, because he is not letting it go.
And there hasn't really been someone fighting this consistently.
Yes,
There's been a lot of people who have been outraged by what's happened, but this is consistent fighting.
Yes.
And so, Mayor, there's so much that we can unpack with this, and I do have some questions I wanted to ask. Starting off, though, I listened to her talk yesterday at that session, and she had talked in that interview about how she was nervous and she felt like she was carrying such a big weight. You felt like you could hear that yesterday in the session, but in that interview, I didn't hear a lot of that. So did you get the sense with her and with the other two that they kind of felt relieved and empowered and heard having sat through that session?
Yes, absolutely. And the fact is, too, being in the same room with Secretary Rachel Jacobson, with General Vereen, those are two very important Army officials. I mean, they were making some important announcements yesterday. I mean, they made the announcement that the Army is requesting $50 million in its budget next year, specifically for
Okay, we seem to have lost Mayor there. Hang on one second. We're gonna try to bring her back on. See if we can get it. 1 second here. But yes, as you heard, part of the reason this was, let's see, if we can get her back here. Hang on. Sorry, folks. That's what happens when you're driving in the car.
Yes.
There we go.
We must be in a bad spot.
Yep, driving through Virginia.
I'm back.
All right. So
Technology.
Talking about they felt kind of empowered and heard following the session and felt like a big weight had been lifted off their chest.
Sure. And I mean, they were in the room with two very heavy hitters. We're talking about, the people who have the power to send a letter to Balfour Beatty saying, you're not in compliance with your contract with the Army. You're in danger of losing this contract. We're in a room with the people who have requested $50 million just for Fort Gordon and their housing
following pressure from my
next year to be able to, make that, sorry, that was a little loud in my ear, to make that, to make housing better in the following year. They've got 118 homes that are currently offline right now. And it's so bad they can't live in them. So they're going to allocate $5.1 million ASAP to get those homes back online. I mean, these are the people who can make these decisions. And they are sitting in the room with the people who are directly affected by these decisions that they make. Now, I tried to speak with both Secretary Rachel Jacobson and General Vereen. They did not want to talk. Secretary Jacobson said, I think everything I said in the hearing should be enough. I beg to differ, but I tried. But I think the important thing is that they met face to face with these families. And the families, they feel like, Nick, that they were jumping up and down, so many work orders that they sent to Balfour Beatty, and a lot of the work orders went unanswered. Or, they call, Joy, for example, was in a hotel for 4 weeks. They arrived at Fort Gordon. They said their house was going to be ready. Because, if they didn't know, if they knew their house wasn't going to be ready, they would have found housing off post. They were only going to be at Fort Gordon for 6 to 8 months. So this wasn't like they were coming here for a while. They're like, okay, great. There's a house ready for us. We'll drive cross country from Washington State and we'll arrive at the house provided. They didn't know until they arrived after driving, 3,000 miles that their home wasn't ready. They were sent to a hotel. And then they start asking questions and they start complaining. And who do you complain to? You complain to Balfour Beatty. Then you complain to the Army, but the Army can't, the Army local offices, they can't make Balfour Beatty produce a home if they don't have one ready. So, they've been jumping up and down, complaining, trying to get someone to listen. And here they are in the same room with Senator John Ossoff, who had the power of subpoena in his position of the chairman of the PSI last year and was able to put Balfour Beatty in the hot seat and ask him questions under oath. Here are these top Army officials. So they had an audience with very important people in this situation, and that in itself was important, because talk about feeling heard and feeling seen, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And that's also why they felt like they were representing more than just themselves, because they were only 3 families there yesterday. There was a fourth person who's been through this herself, but she now works as an advocate helping other military families. But I mean, those were just a couple of examples, several examples of dozens, hundreds of families having problems. And I'm contacted all the time from families across the country who are like, what can I do? They Google housing problems and my name pops up, and what can I do, and who can I contact? Because they just run into brick walls and red tape. So yesterday was a big win for the families to be able to be in that room, because I know a lot of the families watching saw themselves in Joy, and saw themselves in Aaron, and saw themselves in Ashley.
Yeah, and Mayor, you've been covering this for a long time. You've seen a lot, you heard a lot. As someone who hasn't, obviously been around this as much, I knew it was bad. I don't think I knew how bad it was until I heard from some of those families yesterday. And one thing that really stuck out to me listening yesterday was Erin Greer's statement, and we'll hear from her in a little bit, but she talked about she and her husband were sleeping outside on the front porch, on the back porch. They were talking about possibly putting an air mattress in the bed of his truck because they couldn't sleep inside. We've seen the videos of the feces coming out of the ceiling for Joy's house. Did you know how bad it was, or were some things said yesterday that opened your eyes a little bit that was like, I didn't even know it was this bad?
Unfortunately, I knew that it was this bad. What shocked me was the story about the woman stumbling into her front yard and passing out, and the fire and rescue finding her unresponsive in her front yard. That I had not heard about. The mold problems, nothing. But what is, and that's what's so sad about this, is that one of the families told me that after they left their home and there was mold in it, that they later went to the tenant, started living in that house, and they said, hey, I just want to warn you, I found mold, so just be careful, and the person responded to them, well, it's military housing. I mean, military housing has mold. It's become such a known thing that, unfortunately, and this is what this person told me, and I don't want to identify them, but I mean, she said that this made her so upset because it's been such a problem for so long that it's just almost accepted now. And this is something that should never be accepted. And because it's been allowed to continue this long, I guess it's one of those silence is permission type things, but because we keep hearing these same stories over and over and over and over and over again. And it what surprises me is that we keep hearing them. I guess it's not more surprising, it's just more shocking that this is still happening. I don't believe in the private sector this would continue to happen. Yeah. Because, the private sector, without the red tape, without the government, the layers and layers and layers of contracts and all of the intricacies, that, people would be fired, contracts would be terminated. But for whatever reason, this 50-year contract has been able to persist. Although, I mean, we have talked about how bad things are, right? There are some areas of improvement, and I do want to kind of talk about that, because it is encouraging. It is spitting in the ocean, I will say that, but there are some areas of improvement that have been identified specifically at Fort Gordon. Some of those areas of improvement, for example, Balfour Beatty has hired more maintenance workers, specifically 18 as of March. There was also another manager and 2 call center employees who were there on site. So it's not someone, in another state. So they are able to answer more of the maintenance calls. They've also been about 130 courses that Balfour Beatty has added as training, so that their technicians are able to be more trained, they're knowledgeable. There's also some quality assurance controls that have been put into place. And unfortunately, one of them was born out of that incident I told you where the woman had the gas leak in her home and she almost died. I mean, it shouldn't have taken this to happen. But, after the Army basically said, hey, you could lose your contract, Balfour Beatty put into place where there are particularly dangerous fixes. For example, when you're installing gas lines and there could be a gas leak and somebody's health and safety could be at risk, somebody will come in now and inspect the work to make sure that gas lines are secured. I can't believe that wasn't happening before, but it wasn't. So now there is, and I feel like in the past when Balfour Beatty made a mistake, they just said, "Oh, my bad," and moved on. So at least now with the oversight and the attention being brought to this, there is swift action. The letter, a very powerful letter, and there has been some follow-up and some follow-through. So this getting out, I think it's important that these stories are told, because if they're not, nothing would ever happen. No change would ever happen. And Nick, I feel this is why, I know you say you were shocked and it was hard to listen to. This is what I've been jumping up and down about for the past 10 years. This is why I keep doing stories and want to keep doing stories. And I feel like, sometimes, I feel like I'm doing the same stories over and over again, but that's why I keep doing the same stories over and over again, because there needs to be attention brought to this. And I'm so glad that there is attention finally being brought to it. And what Senator Ossoff said to me yesterday? He said, Meredith, you must have been so frustrated all these years. I said, I have been. So thank you, because I have been sending out every time I've been doing stories, every time there's a new elected official, I have been sending all of our I-team stories. I mean, I felt bad for anybody who got elected in our area, because I would send them 500 links. Said, hey, I'm Meredith. I've been working on this. What do you think? So, I'm just appreciative that there is progress. I'm appreciative that we've been able to make the trip to Washington, D.C. twice to have Fort Gordon in the national spotlight. Fort Gordon should have been in the national spotlight for this years ago. But, it's, to me, even though it's bad and the news is bad and, you're hearing all these horror stories and they're heartbreaking, it's a good thing we're hearing about it, because finally people are paying attention. Finally, enough people are shocked and upset and saying this can't happen anymore.
Yeah, and Mayor, I think one of the loudest statements made yesterday was by the lack of a statement, or really the lack of an appearance from Balfour Beatty. And that's something Senator Ossoff made. He didn't sugarcoat it at all. He came right out of the start of that meeting and said, these guys were invited, they didn't show up. And you've talked to them. You had that meeting with them a couple years ago, and they talked about this transparency that they want to, commit to. And yesterday we saw the exact opposite of that.
Yeah, it was. I will say this, and I had not been aware of this until yesterday, but Senator Ossoff did recognize that Balfour Beatty has been extremely responsive with his team and has been providing documentation, has been responsive, answering questions with his team. And so that's great, I guess. But this isn't about answering to Senator Ossoff. At the end of the day, Balfour Beatty's really needs to be answering to these families. And they need to be answering to especially those women who were sitting in there yesterday. And I think it's great that they have been responsive to Senator Ossoff, but when it boils down to it, they really need to, be having these conversations with the people who they are directly hurting.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we've heard from them really just one time since this whole thing has started. But Mayor, there was another incident that I didn't know about until yesterday morning listening, that really, I guess, hadn't happened until Monday night. that Senator Ossoff talked about right at the beginning as well, about a phone call that one of the women had gotten just hours before she was supposed to talk to Senator Ossoff and the Army. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, the details were few and far between, but we could all kind of read between the lines of what that meant. Apparently, one of the witnesses yesterday received a phone call on the eve of the oversight session from leadership, basically saying, "Hey, what are you going to talk about? You know, who are you going to talk about? What specifically are you going to mention?" And that's intimidating to say the least. And Senator Ossoff opened the session yesterday saying, you know, intimidation will not be tolerated, bullying will not be tolerated. You know, these families are free to speak out, and this is unacceptable. Retaliation is unacceptable. And that's been a key part of this all along, is that a lot of families have been afraid to speak up. And I'm not just saying to speak up in a Senate hearing or a Senate oversight session, or even you know, do an interview with the I-team. These people are also afraid to complain to their housing liaisons on post, or they're afraid to complain to Balfour Beatty. They're afraid to speak up at all, because there are ways that retaliation can happen, and there are ways that retaliation can happen very discreetly. For example, when a family moves out of their home, you know, we've all rented an apartment or a house where we pay that security deposit, right? Well, a lot of times families who speak up have told me later that their move out has been just ridiculous, with charges for this, that, and the other. And they fully believe that because they spoke up, they were labeled a problem family, even though making sure your house is safe shouldn't make you a problem family. But they clearly believe that they were labeled a problem family, and that, you know, they were retaliated against upon move out, and that's why they had to pay fees. Or that when they went to their next assignment, and Balfour Beatty owns more than 50 other, they own and operate 50 other operations at 50 other housing, you know, installations across our country. So if you know, get your marching orders to go somewhere else, chances are you could be in another Balfour Beatty community. Well, they're afraid that they'll get a bad house there, or they won't be on the list, or so they're afraid that this will follow them. So a lot of people just don't speak up, and a lot of times too, they're only here for like 6 months. So they're like, okay, can I handle this? Can I just suck it up, get through this short amount of time, and then leave and Fort Gordon's in the rearview mirror? And if I don't speak up, then I'm not labeled a problem, and then, you know, I don't have this, you know, target on my back for my family. So does it surprise me that happened? Absolutely not, because it is right in line with what people have been saying all along. Am I glad Senator Ossoff addressed it? Absolutely, because it's about time that this unspoken fear that, you know, has been happening is addressed by somebody of his stature.
Yeah, you talked about people maybe just are there for 6 months, 8 months, whatever, and then move on, so they just put up with it. One woman who has not been there for 6 months is Erin Greer. And if I was listening correctly, I thought I heard her say she got to Fort Gordon in 2016 and has been there since. And so she has seen these problems firsthand for years now. And we'll play her sound in a little bit here as well. And that was the testimony that really stuck out to me in hearing about she and her husband slept in the cars, and they thought about putting the air mattress up in the bed of the truck. You know, what did she have to say, having dealt with this for so long?
It's so sad. A lot of times, like for example, when Joy was displaced, the woman we heard from earlier, she was the one who, when she went to move into her home, had feces dripping from the ceiling and the bugs in the bathtub. Balfour Beatty displaced her family. Obviously, she couldn't get there. So when Balfour Beatty said, "Okay, we're going to have to, you know, move you out," they sent her to a hotel. So Balfour Beatty paid for the hotel. Well, if Balfour Beatty doesn't displace you, you don't get the hotel paid for. So when Erin Greer and her husband complained about, you know, mold in their home, feeling sick, that sort of thing, Balfour Beatty said, "All right, well, we'll send an inspector." They sent an inspector, and Erin says that they said, "Oh, your house is fine," but she said, I just don't feel good about this." So she and her husband hired their own third-party inspector, and the inspector told her that their home was unfit for human occupancy. So she was in the situation where Balfour Beatty, because their inspector said it was fine, they wouldn't pay for a hotel. So she would have to essentially be paying double rent. She'd have to be paying for a hotel, and she'd have to be paying for this home with mold. So she said she and her husband couldn't afford to go to a hotel. So that's the difference. Some people don't understand, well, why did you stay? Well, they didn't have any other option, and they couldn't afford to go somewhere else. They couldn't afford to pay for Balfour Beatty's home, and they couldn't afford to pay to live somewhere else too. So that's where she was kind of stuck. And she said that the best thing she could do was just stay outside as much as she could.
Yeah, and she said, I think that they had 2 dogs that had died earlier than they were expected to, and they attribute that to the poor housing conditions.
Yeah.
I mean, and think about it. You have these military families living outside, like they're on Survivor, because they don't have livable housing, and they're staying on the porch, and it's just, like I said, if it was an apartment complex just out in Augusta, nobody would ever live there. And yet here we are with our military families going through this. So I actually want to play Erin Greer's interview. It's about 11 minutes. So again, we'll step away for a few minutes, let this play out, and then we'll come back and we'll continue chatting.
Okay.
I almost fell out of my chair when I heard you talk about sleeping in your car, sleeping on your porch.
Yes.
How did it get to that?
When we gave them the mold inspector's certificate stating that our home was unfit for human occupancy, they told us that we had to wait until they would step in and help us until their own mold inspector came in. And then we couldn't get any assistance, even though I repeatedly tried for days.
What made you hire your own independent mold inspector? Because that probably, what if you had not done that and you had just listened to the one that was provided?
So we had an incident in 2019 with mold, and this was just an opportunity to follow up on that because I didn't really get that assessed what I thought was in the proper way.
Gotcha. What led you to speak here today? Because I know this takes a lot of courage. I mean, it takes a lot of courage to report this, first of all, to Balfour Beatty, but it also to travel to Washington, D.C., to tell your story, in front of a senator. That takes a lot of courage. What led you to do this?
So what led me to come today is my friends that were leaving Fort Gordon home, on post housing. My friends that were leaving behind, they will still be living in on post housing, and there's going to be people that come in to these houses after I leave. And I wanted to say something today about our experiences to kind of help make things better for them. Make it better when I leave than it was when I came.
That's still very commendable. I mean, your husband's fighting in the Army. Do you feel like you're also having to fight? But this isn't something that you signed up for.
No. Yes, I do feel like I'm having to fight. I feel it's been just a constant fight since 2016 when we first got here.
When was your, I think Joy mentioned you had something as recent as this month come up.
Yes, just a few weeks ago.
What happened then?
Our downstairs bathroom started flooding with sewage and water, and it flooded a portion of the house downstairs. They came, they fixed it. It happened again the following day. They came back, they partially fixed it, said they were going to return the following day, and they never did. And then a couple days later, I got a text message saying that they'd closed the work order.
Oh man. You also talked about health issues. What kind of health problems have you and your family experienced?
So me and my husband, we have headaches, we have chronic fatigue, body aches, nosebleeds, memory loss, just a few to list.
Do you have any kids?
We do not have any kids, we just have one dog.
And what did the mold look like when you started seeing that in your house? Like, was it apparent, or did you just start feeling ill?
It was black, and it started in one of the bathrooms of the house, and then it kind of progressed from there as time went on, as us being in the house.
I've heard some families get an excuse from Balfour Beatty where they say, oh, this is just Georgia, you know, it gets humid here. Is that some of the things they told you, or did they just flat out tell you were wrong, that it's not mold?
I don't think anybody has ever flat out said that it's not mold. In 2019, we had the incident. It was visible. It was there. They did minimal treatment with it. But as far as the excuses, I mean, there's far too many to list of what they've told me.
Really?
Yeah.
What did they say? Did they say it was just bad paint?
As far as housing issues, air conditioning units not working correctly, hot air rises. When we had a water leak, they said that it was just condensation coming, but we had water running down the driveway. I mean, it's just the list of crazy excuses we've gotten is just insane.
And were you just, what are you supposed to say to that? I mean, do you just say, no, I don't believe you, but they say that's what, I mean, are you just at an impasse?
They don't care if you don't believe them. They just don't care.
Do you wish that you had never moved on post?
I do. I really do. If I could go back and do things differently, if I had found out that we were going to come, if we had not come here as quickly as we could and I could have better prepared, I definitely would have not moved on to Fort Gordon.
Why did you move on Fort Gordon? I've had some families say it's, you know, the nation's safest gated community, or, you know, we moved so fast I didn't have time.
That's how we got here. My husband's PCS at the time, it came so quickly that on-post housing was the only option for us.
So you moved super fast, you moved in, and then you got here in 2016?
Correct.
And when did you start noticing problems with your house?
Problems with the house in late December of 2016, and we got here in September of 2016, and then throughout the spring of 2017, and then it kind of progressed from there.
And they never fixed it, or they just Band-Aid?
I would call it Band-Aid, bare minimum stuff, or some stuff never was really fixed at all.
I'm just so sorry. You're leaving because your husband has assigned somewhere else?
My husband has medically retired from the military, and we've rented another property. We are leaving Fort Gordon, and we are so happy to just be out and be done with it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank him for his service,
and thank you
for your sacrifice during his service. Do you feel hopeful today? I mean, I know you spoke out to make this a better situation for those after you.
Yeah.
Do you leave here with a sense that things are going to change, that things will be better for those after you?
I certainly hope so. I am very, very hopeful for a change.
Do you think Senator Ossoff is going to stay with this?
I think so, and I really hope that he does, because this is an important issue for a lot of people. I think that a lot of people don't realize that it's not only just active duty soldiers on Fort Gordon, it's also retiree military. There's just a whole other community of people that a lot of people don't realize, so it's a very important issue for a lot of people. I think some even DOD civilians live in a privatized housing.
How has this affected you beyond your health? Because I know that Joy was talking about like soldier morale. Mm-hmm. Has this been a stress for you and your husband?
Yes. It's constant stress. I mean, things with the house, they're constantly breaking. Nothing ever works right, and we can't get things fixed and repaired in a timely manner. So when you don't have the basic necessities and you can't get the basic needs, it progresses to where it's an even bigger struggle later when the bigger things that you need, you can't get those either.
And it's important that you say basic necessities, mm-hmm. because you're not complaining about the paint's not right, or I mean, this is stuff the Army itself calls life, health, safety.
Correct.
Affects your life, health,
Yes.
and your safety. So it's not like you're being picky about cosmetic issues.
Right.
These are basic safety issues that
Right.
anywhere else the house might be condemned.
Right. Yes.
What did you think when you got that independent inspection back and it said it wasn't fit for humans to live in this space? Did you feel like vindicated, but at the same time, like, what am I going to do?
I did. I was like, what are we going to do? You know, because I knew the battle that was ahead of me. And it was a battle even after I gave them that for us to get any sort of temporary assistance. I had expectations as soon as they were notified of that, the assistance would come to us immediately, but they kept telling us we had to wait.
And you would have gotten assistance had Balfour Beatty moved you out.
Correct.
But because you hired your own, they were mad at you.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
What did they say when you hired an independent inspector?
As far as anything, there was no concern for overall health and safety. Their primary concern was we had allowed an inspector to come in and drill holes in the walls, and a Balfour Beatty worker had told me, we may reside in the house, we may pay rent on the house, but that house is not ours to do with what we want to with it, that we have to get permission from them.
Permission
Yeah.
to inspect it for safety.
Correct. And you could walk around and see that our house was just not safe.
But yet their inspector said it was safe?
I don't know what their inspector said. I was never given a copy of the report.
Wait, what?
Yeah, I tried multiple times. I could never get a copy of the Balfour Beatty's and the Balfour Beatty mold inspector. I never received a copy of his report, even though I was told I was going to get one.
Wow.
Yeah. And I tried from October of 2022 to January 2023 for that, and I still didn't receive it.
Gosh. Wow.
Yeah. It's a lot.
It is a lot. But it's going to be in the rearview mirror soon.
Yes. Yes. I just hope that today, me coming here and sharing my experiences and just some of the story, that this can help some other people. I mean, I know that, like, my best friend, she's still going to be living on post, and they're going to be shortly moving to another base. And I just hope that for my friends, a change can be made.
Mayor, one thing I wanted to talk about here, because she talked about it, Joy talked about it, was morale. And that was a big thing that they talked about yesterday as well, because Senator Ossoff said we've already got a problem with recruiting as many soldiers as we need. And now we've got this problem with retention. So really, this could be a much bigger problem than just some bad houses on post at Fort Gordon.
Oh, absolutely. And not only could we have problems with soldiers, wanting to leave because of this, think about specifically Fort Gordon. I mean, we're training our cyber warriors of tomorrow, but with all the private cyber companies, we've got Amazon, we've got Google, we have all these other companies that can offer better. And why would you want to stay in a situation where your family's health is at risk? So yeah, there's that. There's also having soldiers, with this mission, this very important mission of our nation's defense, and they're distracted. They're worried about their families, they're thinking about their families. So we all have a vested interest in making sure that families are safe. And Senator Ossoff put this very eloquently yesterday when we spoke after the session. He said this is a morality issue, because obviously we should care about these people and what they're going through and make sure that their homes are safe. But this is also an issue of national defense. And it is twofold. Like you mentioned, it's a retention issue, but it's also a distraction issue as well. Because if you aren't, in the right mindset, how can you do your job effectively? And we need to make sure that our soldiers aren't worried about stuff like this. I mean, this should be the last thing they're worried about.
Yeah, and that's something that Brianna Barnhart, who was the fourth woman there yesterday who spoke, she's with the Safe Military Housing Initiative. She talked about that a little bit too. What was kind of her role and her responsibility in this session yesterday?
Well, she represented a whole lot of families, and she also represented a lot of these grassroots groups that have sprung up all over the country out of necessity. And I have to give a shout out to all of them, because all of these groups are made up of people who have worked the system, people who have been through a traumatic event with their own housing experience. They have lived and learned, and they have scar tissue, and they know how to help other people navigate the system. So they all kind of band together and they help one another. And it always starts out small. It always starts with a small group of Facebook groups, and then it expands and it expands, and sometimes they become nonprofits. But what she said yesterday represents so many of these groups that have formed that are just basically people who have been through this. They have the lived experience, and they just want to pass on, what they've learned to others. And also too, I think that she was important to be in there as well, because this was very Balfour Beatty centric. This was very Fort Gordon centric. And Fort Gordon and Balfour Beatty, obviously, Fort Gordon just one of many U.S. Army installations. And, we're just talking about the Army. There's also the Navy, the Air Force, there's lots of other installations. And there's also a lot of other companies. But there's at least a dozen other companies that have this privatized contract. And Balfour Beatty is a bad one. And I say bad because of all the problems and attention that they've had. But they're not even, some would say they're not even the worst. So it was important that she was there, because she kind of represents the big picture in all of this. She represents, some of the other branches. She represents some of the other installations. She represents some of the families that are coping with problems with other companies, because there are these military groups that form and they help one another. And it's awesome to see these groups help, but it's just so sad that they have to even exist, because that just shows you how bad the problem is. But it also shows you how amazing some of these military families are. I have worked with some of these groups, Nick, and I mean their research is quite amazing, and some of the things that they're able to do. And one voice is powerful, two voices can be very powerful, but these groups, when they get together like that, become a chorus. And I think they have been a big part of bringing attention to all of this. So it was important that we hear from her too, I think, because of the big picture, because she could, she represents a lot of families that she helps as well.
Yeah, and I still think, I go back to also that we still don't know the full scope of this, because for every family that's come out, and for every family that we heard from yesterday and at the hearing last year, there are still more that haven't spoken out, but we're going to get those answers soon. Maybe not necessarily, soon's a relative term, of course, but we've got these inspections going on Fort Gordon right now, and I know we've talked about this previously, but we haven't broken it down yet in this chat. So if you can kind of go over the inspections that are happening now, and those are actually separate from what that session was about yesterday.
Sure. I mean, they're completely separate, but at the same time, they're also pretty tightly linked, because those inspections are an example. Yesterday, when Senator Ossoff was talking about, what are some good things that have happened since his PSI investigation and those results were released. And, once he held that hearing last year, and the Army really has kind of stepped up, and he said that he believes the Army is taking this more seriously. We talked about that letter that Secretary Jacobs had sent after that woman was found unresponsive on her lawn with a gas leak. Well, that letter is proof that the Army is taking it more seriously, but so are these inspections, because the Army said, you know what, yeah, we will inspect every housing unit. And so that's kind of proof that they are. And I asked Senator Ossoff what he thinks about those inspections, how they're going. And he says he's not really ready to answer that question. And I understand that, because they just started last week. He was there for one day of them. He sat with the families as they were happening. But the fact that they are happening, the fact that they are so intensive, the fact that the Army is committed to doing every single unit. I mean, this is every single home, and this data has never been collected this way. And again, we've talked about this before, but the importance of this inspection is that Balfour Beatty has always inspected itself. And this is a company that is difficult to trust because they are coming off the heels of being convicted of frauding the U.S. government, of kind of manipulating work order data to make it look like things are better than they are. And there have been even these problems that have been identified in the year since the PSI report was released. Senator Ossoff talked a little bit about some of those issues. For example, mold remediation remains a problem. Work orders remain a problem. Some of the things that they looked at. So Balfour Beatty is a company that we have to look at with some skepticism, right? Especially since they weren't there yesterday. They're not willing to talk to these families face to face. So when a company like that inspects itself, it is a fair question to say, are these inspections really giving us accurate data? Well, now there's going to be no question that the data is accurate because there is a third party coming in. So that data is going to tell us more than ever before, because we can, we don't question the results. This isn't Balfour Beatty telling us how Balfour Beatty homes are. Balfour Beatty has always tried to look good in front of the Army, and rightfully so. I mean, they're in a partnership, but they also have this contract with them. So this is a way that Balfour Beatty is going to be inspected by a third party. And I mean, we just saw the example of what Balfour Beatty inspectors do with the Aaron Greer situation, right? The Balfour Beatty inspectors came in, they said, oh, you don't have mold. Well, Aaron Greer hired a third party inspector, and he came in and said, your home is not fit for humans to live in. So there's always discrepancies between, third party inspectors and Balfour Beatty inspectors.
Yeah, and so that's all happening now, and again, that'll probably take another 3.5 weeks. That's kind of the rough estimate, but as you said before, it could depend. Some houses, they may get done in 20 minutes. Some houses, they may take a lot longer, just depending on what all they find.
Right.
Because, 1,700 units, they're going to find some different stuff. But one thing I kind of noticed yesterday was the three families who spoke, their stories were all different, right? Everybody had a different experience, but there were a lot of similarities in those stories. We had broken promises, a lack of transparency, feeling like their voices weren't being heard. And the third woman that we heard from, Ashley Porras, one part that stuck out to me was at one point, she was explaining her story, and Senator Ossoff said, so it was you and your 4 kids living in one hotel room? And she said, yes. And can you give us a little bit more on her story, and then we'll play her interview with you as well.
Yeah, she said that as a mom, that was just so hard because, and you'll hear what she had to say about that, but she picked up her kids from school, and they're like, oh, Mom, are we going home? And she's like, no, we're going to a hotel. And the kids, it's just really confusing. Military families move all the time, and that's, asking a lot of their children anyway. But to then be shuffled like into a house, into a hotel, then into a house, then into a hotel, then into another house, it's very confusing for them. And what's really sad is that, when you live in a house that becomes infested with mold, you don't just, move out and take all your stuff with you. Your stuff kind of takes on the mold too. So they didn't just lose their home. They lost all the things in it. Like they weren't able to, I mean, you can redo the couches and there's a way to remediate it, but it's very expensive and time consuming. And quite frankly, Ashley told me it just wasn't worth it. So not only is she dealing with, her kids feeling displaced, there's also like a sense of loss, because at least when you're a military family and you move to different places, you take the same stuff with you to those different places. So different places can feel like home, but when this mold situation happened, they had some problems with their health, and then they lost their stuff. And I know to us that might seem like, oh, just get new stuff, but to a kid whose sense of security and stuff feeling like home, I mean, that's hard as a parent, to have to explain that kind of stuff to your kids. Plus, there's some sentimental value and some things too. I kind of understand. I have some baby clothes of Bella's that if I had to get rid of, that would kill me. and that happened to Ashley. So, that's just like rubbing salt in the wound. First of all, your health is affected. Then you lose your home. It's stressful. It's a financial burden to lose all your furniture and all your stuff. But then you lose all these sentimental things that you can't really put a price on.
Yeah, and I think.
And
Oh, good.
her husband's a drill sergeant, so she is caring for these kids as well. But a drill sergeant is in charge of a lot of the younger enlisted soldiers too. So she's dealing with her own family, but there's also this worry of are these younger enlisted soldiers also dealing with the same things as well? And this absolutely broke my heart. But Ashley told me yesterday that and when you're in the middle of something, sometimes it's hard to figure out what's going on. But she said that she feels like she failed her kids because she didn't recognize sooner what was going on. And that, all the excuses were coming, like, oh, it's allergies, it's Georgia. And she believed them at first. She said that she wished that she would have, been able to step back and kind of put two and two together and figure out the mold situation sooner. But that she feels like she failed her kids. And that just, mom guilt is awful. But, you can tell her all day long, you did not fail your kids. Val Fabidi failed you. But it's just, the emotions are real. And I think that's another part of this too, that you can talk about the data, you can talk about the mold, you can talk about, this house has these problems, and you can look at all these papers and documents, and you can look at it from a science factor. But when you look at the emotions of, these families who have lived through this, you can't put, a data figure on the stress. You can't put a number on the emotional toll that all of this puts on these families, and they're already dealing with a lot as it is. So there's a lot of layers to this that it's just so unfair. But it's another reason why I also think talking about it is a good thing, because these families, when they're going through this too, they feel so alone. In the moment, you just feel like you're just having a string of bad luck, or why is this happening to me? But when you find out it's happening to others, it's awful too, because it's worse to know that other people are going through it, because wow, how can this be a problem other people are dealing with? But there's also a better sense of community, and maybe safety in numbers, and maybe we can, again, one voice is one voice, but a lot of voices is a chorus.
Yeah, and I think she had said yesterday when she was talking about her kids in the hotel room, I think she said her son turned 18 in that room and graduated high school in that room. And so these core memories for any teenager, and he's doing it at a hotel room. And you talk about the sentimental value of things, and when you move around a lot, if you're a kid, it's hard to get attached to people or the place that you live, because you get attached, and then 6, 12, 18 months later, it's time to move again. And so those things, the books, the blankets, the clothes, like those are the things you kind of get attached to. And so to lose all that, it's almost harder in a sense, because that is your life more than even the house is. Because as you grow up learning that the houses may be temporary, but it's the things that you have that are a little bit more permanent. So just can't even imagine losing all those things. But let's go ahead and play the sound that we have, the interview that you did with Ashley. This runs about 9 minutes if you're keeping along here. So we'll play that, and then we'll come back and chat a little bit more.
Why did you end up coming here today, and why did you want to share your story?
I came here today to speak on behalf of all the families that feel like they can't speak up. We were able to get out of our situation, and some families are still stuck there, so they weren't able to get out of theirs.
How many kids do you have?
I have a total of 4 babies.
And this was really hard on them. Kind of talk about what they went through with all of this.
They were very confused, as it was they just finished dealing with a move for us to get to Fort Gordon, that they settled down and they were like, this is our home, to, okay guys, I picked you up from school, we're gonna be in a hotel. And they're like, what happened to our home? And we would drive by and where's all of our stuff? And sorry babies, we can't go in there anymore. Then to the Airbnb, and again, so are we ever going back to our home? No baby. And then when we were able to live off post, they were told, this is your new home. but you now have little to nothing of your belongings because all of that had to get rid of due to the mold spores. So there was no couches that they remembered, beds that they remembered, clothes, because we would have had to remediate it, or a lot of the stuff couldn't be remediated. So when we did our move out, we had to trash everything.
Oh my gosh. I mean, and that's not just,
We
you know,
lived in on-base
expensive,
housing,
that's
managed and
emotional. I mean,
maintained
I don't know
by Betty.
about you.
I'm
an
here today to testify
emotion-
about the
I'm not
problems
a
we
hoarder,
have
but
had
like,
with I get Balfour's emotionally careless attached, mismanagement of and our especially housing I and have 3 inadequate boys and representation one amazing
military
little girl.
families have.
Well, with the 3 boys, I
RCI
like to
stands
keep
for
a set of
Resident
clothes, like
Communities
hand-me-downs,
Initiatives
to have
from
them.
those operations.
That was now gone.
And
So I
following
had to
pressure
part
from
with
my
them, you know. But in the
On
grand scheme
May
of things,
27th,
are
we
the
were
clothes
finally
worth it
assigned a
versus
house
their
on
health?
base.
Of course not. So that's what made it more easy to get rid of everything.
when did you realize you had a problem with the mold? And I mean, did you start noticing people were getting sick in your house?
We were all getting sick. My husband, he does not like to take medication. He's a person that just likes to, you know, generally be healthy. And he was getting bad migraines almost every day. And so he was having to take Excedrin, and we just could not shake it off. We were wondering, why are we feeling this way? Why are the kids getting nosebleeds? Why is his stomach hurting so much? And I actually had an incident with a vent as well, where I had moved the little pulley system on it, and when I did that, debris went into my face. And the same thing, burning. I ended up going to the hospital the next day because my throat was clamping up, and they ended up saying it was due to whatever went into your face that caused that. So then at that point I said, okay, there's something even more serious than what I thought. And so that's the first start of me piecing everything together.
So did you then contact Balfour Beatty first and say, hey, I think my house is making us sick?
I did.
What did they say?
They asked me why I was messing with the vents to cause that. And I said, well, it's there to be able to direct the airflow. And so that's all I was doing. And so they said, we'll go ahead and go in and do a duct cleaning and replace the vents. Well, once they did that, on the caulking around the new vents started having black spots come out from it. And so their explanation to me was the maintenance worker must have done it wrong.
Oh my gosh. And did you just say, okay? Or did you know something was really wrong then?
I had my suspicions, but I had explained to them I saw the maintenance worker do it. It was white. There wasn't where he caulked it and it looked messy. It was pure white around it. So for us to fast forward about 3 weeks and then there's black appearing on it, you can't really say that it was the maintenance worker that did that.
Oh my gosh. And how did you realize the nosebleeds and everything was connected to that? I mean, because you've got 4 children, you're busy. I mean, hindsight's always 20/20, and it
Right.
always is easy to see when it's in the rearview mirror. But when you're like in something, sometimes it's hard to put 2 and 2 together. And you don't think my house is making me sick.
Right.
I mean, you go to a million different things first.
Other things, and that's what they were trying to tell me. Oh, it's Georgia. It must be allergies. That's what you're trying to get adjusted to it, which I accepted it for a while. You know, that's reasonable. But after me digging through Facebook and seeing if other families were experiencing the same things, I slowly started piecing everything together that, oh, there is a thing, you know, that can cause this and be a reason for everything.
Has this caused a lot of stress for you and your family?
It has.
Kind of talk about that.
My husband, he's been such a trooper, but in between his drill duties and us constantly moving, it took a toll on us. It took a toll on our marriage. It really made us have to communicate properly to be able to be moving all the different elements of it. When I'm wanting to spend time with my children, I'm working on emails to try to talk to Belford and RCI, and that takes time away from the family. So it was definitely difficult.
And you're
the whole situation.
Frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
And did you ever just think, like, how can this be real life?
Yes.
I mean, my husband's a drill sergeant. I'm working, you know, we're a military family. I can't believe we're being treated this way.
Yes, I did. It almost felt like a dream. So every time I would wake up in the hotel, I'm like, well, this really did happen, and it's continuing to happen. So it felt surreal every single day that I was living through it.
How are your kids' health now? How is your health now? Are y'all better?
We are slowly getting better. We're on the uphill. They are becoming more vibrant again. When they were coming home from school, when we were living in the home, Mom, I'm so tired. Mom, my head hurts. Mom, I got a bloody nose at school. The nurse had to help me clean up. Can we go to sleep now? Children of those ages want to be running around. They have an immense amount of energy. When mine were coming home, I'm tired. I just want to lay down. And now they're back to being vibrant and running around and being children.
Does that just break your heart as a mom?
It does. It feels like we failed them because 2020, I should have pieced it faster. I should have acted faster. I shouldn't have settled for what they were telling me. So it feels like I failed them to a point as a parent because it's my job to protect them. And then the one thing that we were provided through my husband's work was what was causing it.
You did not fail them. Balfour Beatty failed you. You did not fail them. Balfour Beatty failed you.
Yes, they did. It's just hard.
100% they did. 100% they did. Do you feel more hopeful after being here today that things are going to get better?
I do. I pray that we are the last families to have these issues and that big changes do come of it. Nobody should have to live the way people are still living today.
I don't have any other questions. Is there anything you want to say that I didn't ask you about?
No, just it's horrible what they're doing. They don't. I personally have friends that are still living there, and these are the same issues that are happening, where RCI is not stepping in for them, where the work orders are being changed around, where they're told, we'll come back, and they never come back, where there's leaking everywhere, and so it's still happening. These are still issues as of last week. I have a dear friend that she's been going through it and still going through it with no changes.
So where are y'all now? A different place?
We ended up moving off post.
Oh, so you don't even...
No. We told them after we found out it was inhabitable, we said we're done. So the last of it was us just tossing out whatever we couldn't keep, and then we moved off post because we weren't going to risk another home that they tried to provide us to be bad.
So there we go, hearing from pull this up real quick. Hearing from Ashley there. And so Meredith, we've heard from these three families and kind of the experiences that they went through. I want to turn the focus now to Senator Ossoff and kind of his response a little bit. Now, I caught the first half of the meeting yesterday with hearing from the families. I did not catch the second half with Ms. Jacobson and Lieutenant General Vereen. What was kind of the tone of that, and what was Senator Ossoff asking them during that part of the meeting?
He basically reiterated his commitment to holding the Army accountable. He said, you know what, the Army is supposed to hold Balfour Beatty accountable, and I will continue to hold the Army accountable. His tone, I found, was a lot more, not so much harsh, but he did grill the Army, and he was very serious. And you know, the Army said, we're doing better, but he said, we have got to do better than better. And he was asking for updates on the new construction, which that was some big news yesterday. We've been reporting on Pine Tree Terrace. We first had the plans and the renderings in April of 2021. Colonel Shawpick has been saying, he was the garrison commander who left. We now have a new one. But he said, and he told me multiple times that, you know, we need new homes on post. Nobody disagrees with that. A lot of the homes were built in the 50s and 60s. They are out of date. And there needs to be things that a facelift can't fix. They need to start from the ground up. There also needs to be some more ADA compliant homes. And that's what's so important about Pine Tree Terrace. So the fact that we're finding out that these 76 new homes, that construction is a priority on them. I mean, COVID, to be fair, COVID caused some problems with that and availability of materials. And we all remember the cost of lumber shot way up. So the Army waited on this project because of a number of complications. But hearing that they're moving forward and that ground is expected to be broken this summer is some very, very big news. But we raised this question last summer, and it's an important one. When when Captain Cho spoke at the PSI hearing last year, and we saw his daughter's skin and her rash, and she kind of became the face of military problems and health conditions living in unsafe homes on post. We pointed out that Captain Cho lived in officer housing on Fort Gordon. Lakeview Terrace is the creme de la creme at Fort Gordon. It's the nicest housing, it's officer housing, and it's the newest housing that they have. So Captain Cho said that he saw our reporting, he took it to Balfour Beatty, and he said, I am worried about my family living on post. And they said, no. Those are problems with old houses. We still have some issues, we're fixing them, but you're going to be moving in the newer homes. These homes don't have these problems. So we've already shown problems with the newer construction at Fort Gordon. So here we have, 76 new homes, billions of dollars being pumped back into this. So we're not saying that new homes aren't the answer. New homes are definitely the answer. But there are some worries that if they're not properly constructed, if there is not proper oversight of the maintenance of these homes, if the same things that have happened to the homes on post now happen to these new homes, we could be sitting in this very same situation 5-10 years from now. So that is a concern that we raised last summer, and Senator Ossoff really echoed those concerns and pressed the Army hard. And when we spoke after the session, he said that this new construction works for those very same reasons. And he said that even when he pressed the Army, that exchange that he had with the Army proves that there is a lot to be done with oversight, and he expects that the Army needs to come up with some ways to better keep tabs on this construction and how Balfour Beatty is maintaining these homes, because it is a valid concern, and it is one that Balfour Beatty's track record is not good, and we can't go into this naively saying, oh, new homes are the answer, and leave it at that. We need to make sure, and I say we, but anybody who has a vested interest in the story, like there has to be a way to make sure that the same thing doesn't happen. And I've said this before, Nick, this isn't, harping on the Army, this isn't harping on Balfour Beatty. This is trying to set this new neighborhood up for success, because everybody involved in this wants this new neighborhood to be successful. The families want it to be successful. The Army wants it to be successful. All of us have a vested interest in it being successful. So there needs to be, Senator Ossoff admits there needs to be a lot more from the Army. He wants to hear more from the Army on how they plan to oversee this. And something promising about this is he also told me that Secretary Jacobson and General Vereen have said that they will make themselves available for another oversight session like this in the future if he were to hold one. Because I did ask him, are you going to hold another one a year from now? And he said there's not really a time frame on anything, but that when or if he feels like it's necessary, he will, and that they've already committed to be here.
Yeah, and I want to touch on something you said right there, talking about we all want this new housing to be successful. I want to go back to what we've talked about the last week or so, is we all want Balfour Beatty to be successful at the end of the day. This is a gotcha campaign on Balfour Beatty. This is, if you guys are successful, that means that the military families are set up for success, and that's really all anybody wants at the end of the day. So, of course, we do want the new housing to be successful, as do we want Balfour Beatty to be successful. But let's go into your conversation with Senator Ossoff a little bit. We heard from him, last time we heard from him was when he was here last week talking about the inspections. beyond just what he told the Army, what was kind of his vibe after the session? What did you guys chat about?
We chatted about a number of things. We talked about the inspections. We talked about, is he happy with the progress that has happened in the last year since the PSI? We talked about the new construction. We talked about, how he's feeling with the progress. Government is notoriously slow, but I did point out that, the families are telling me that they are hopeful that he is getting things done, that I've been jumping up and down about this for a long time, and that I'm hopeful, somebody who, has a vested interest in this just because I'm part of this community and really rooting for the military families. At the end of the day, I don't think anybody is against military housing being successful, right? Like, we all want this to do well. And so far, he's the one who's been able to get the most done. So I think it's encouraging that, that he hears that people are responding, and that he also has bipartisan support. This is not a Democrat thing, a Republican thing. This is an American thing. And hopefully the attention he's drawing to it will get more attention of other senators. Fort Gordon is in Georgia, but there are other installations in other states, and maybe this will have another senator or representative in other states kind of champion some of their constituents, some of their home installations. And maybe if we had a Senator Ossoff in every state kind of take on this role, more would get done, and it just remains to be seen where we go from here. But the ball is rolling, albeit a slow one, and at least it's moving, and forward progress is a good thing. But we talked about a number of things. I think you have our conversation in its entirety.
Yeah, we do. But before I play it and we let you go here, I wanted to ask you too, there was this feeling of kind of cautious optimism going up to this hearing because there have been times before where there was hope, and then the rug's kind of gotten pulled out, 2019 being the prime example that we keep talking about. What was the feeling after? I know you had kind of asked them a little bit in the interviews, and we heard that hope was restored a little bit. Is that the sense you got, that there's been a bigger sense of hope moving forward than they've ever had before in this?
It is, and I think it's because this has continued to stay in the spotlight. 2019, it was a big deal when it was even dubbed a housing crisis, and then it just kind of shrank away from the headlines, and nobody talked about it anymore. And that's the unfortunate cycle that I have seen with this. You bring up a story of a military family going through something unfortunate. Somebody says they're outraged, right? And then, oh, I want to do something, and then you never hear anything again. This is different because we are continually hearing updates, albeit sometimes small ones, but hearing that the inspection started last week and Senator Ossoff being here to personally oversee them, that's a big deal. I mean, the fact, first of all, that the Army is doing this is a big deal. The data we're going to get from this is a big deal, but also a senator throwing his weight behind it, overseeing it, kind of saying, you know what, you better get this right. And that oversight is important because for so long, Balfour Beatty has kind of been able to operate in a vacuum. No one's really been checking that. And that's why these problems have gotten so bad. Now, this sends a message that you can't operate in a vacuum. You can't do these things and go unchecked. You can't have a woman pass out from gas fumes in her front yard and potentially have a life-threatening situation and nothing comes of it. Things have come of problems, when in the past things have not come of problems in the past. So the fact that things are happening, that there was an investigation that was 8 months long, there was a hearing on Capitol Hill, 1 year later we're back on Capitol Hill, we're hearing from more families. The Army has to give a detailed list of everything that's happened. The Army suspended bonuses, Balfour Beatty bonuses at Fort Gordon. All of these things are more progress than we've seen in years in just a short amount of time. But the fact that they keep happening and things are keep continually progressing is a great sign. And the families are seeing real change in real time. You know, the inspections were announced. Then they were announced in January or December, I believe. It was either right around December, January. Then we found out they're happening in April. So there is not this, date off like 5 years from now when things are happening. Things are happening. We found out that the construction is starting, in 60 to 90 days this summer. There are real timelines. There are real things that are happening. $50 million the Army is requesting in next year's budget for Fort Gordon. So when you add all of these things together, even one of these things would have been a huge deal. But we have a lot of these things happening at once. And so all of that is adding to the hope that things aren't just being talked about, things are happening, and for the first time. And it's refreshing. And you know what? This should have happened years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like we've been saying, like you've said a number of times today in the past week, at the end of the day, all we really want is for the military families to be successful and to have a livable place to put a roof over their heads and have their kids sleep at night. So, Meredith, what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and play the interview that you've got here with Senator Ossoff. This one runs about 17 and a half minutes, and that'll take us right up to about our midday newscast. So if you've made it this far in the stream, props to you for sticking with us for this long. But, Mayor, thank you for the time today and all the work that you've put into this, not only the past week, talking with me and being up there on Capitol Hill, but really the last decade plus, bringing these families and their situations to light and helping get the ball rolling on this. It's been very important work, and I'm sure these families are grateful, and Senator Ossoff is grateful as well. So we appreciate the time and effort that you've put into this too. So I just wanted to let you know that before we let you go here. But other than that, again, thanks for tuning in, folks. We have all of this stuff up on our website, WRDW.com, also on our YouTube channel, WRDW News 12, and also on our streaming app. So if you download our WRDW app on your Fire Stick, your Roku, your Apple TV, whatever your favorite streaming device is, you just search WRDW on there. Give it a download. We've got all of this stuff on here dating back 10 plus years talking about these issues that Meredith's been working on now. So go ahead and give those a download, subscribe to the YouTube channel. You get all the updated information and whatnot. But yeah, Meredith, we will wish you a safe drive. Hope to see you back here in, 6 hours now, 5.5 hours or so?
Yep. And I'll be back at work tomorrow. Shout out to Gary, who is MacGyver, who was the man behind the camera for all of that, who was able to figure out how to make us live from the Capitol Rotunda yesterday, which is no easy task, I might add. Send all this video back. It's to make us live here in the car along I-95. How cool is this? Also, it's really cool to be able to do a situation like this. This story is so complex and there are so many layers. And last night at 11, I did a piece that was about 3 minutes. I did something at 5 and 5:30 and 6 o'clock last night. Nowhere near could we, it's scratching the surface. But when we talk in a situation like this, we can really get to all of the details and we can really kind of flesh out everything. So as somebody who's passionate about this story and who's really followed it for a long time, I appreciate giving it the time it deserves and having this format where we can, give all of this information, because the military families who care about this can get all of the details. And it's just a really cool format to be able to dive in and do kind of a more deep dive than we're able to do on our newscasts.
Yeah, and I still feel like we're barely scratching the surface on this. And we've been talking for about an hour and a half here today, but there's still just so much more that could be said. I'm sure we are not done talking about this. We've still got these inspections going on, and we've got more houses being built. We've got all sorts of stuff still happening. So this is certainly not the last we will talk about this. But Mayor, we'll let you go here. Have a safe drive, and we'll see you back here a little bit later on tonight.
All right.
All right, Meredith Anderson there, helping us out from the road, talking about Fort Gordon military housing. And like I said, we will play this interview with Senator Ossoff. That'll take us right up to our midday newscast. So if you want to swap over to the TV side of things, Tim and I will have the latest news and weather for you over there. But again, we appreciate you tuning in. We'll leave you with Senator Ossoff.
1 year later, I mean, it's almost a year. I think we counted, it was like 7 days shy of a year. How happy are you with the progress since the results of that PSI investigation were released and since the hearing was held?
I think there are indications that the Army is taking this seriously. Immediately following the release of my findings a year ago, the Army launched 2 independent investigations, suspended incentive fee payments to Balfour Beatty, pending those investigations, warned Balfour Beatty that they could lose the ground lease if they're out of compliance, and agreed at my request to inspect every single home on post. So that is a demonstration of seriousness by the Army to doing right by the military families at Fort Gordon. But we've still got a long way to go. And as I have reminded you and others from the beginning, this is a tough problem to solve, and it's going to require a sustained effort. I am sustaining that effort, and today's oversight session was a continuation of that effort.
I can say, I mean, I've been following this for a long time. I can say I've seen more happen in the last 2 years than I've seen happen in the last 12 years. So just from someone who's been following this for a long time, there is forward progress. And I know it can feel slow, but it's actually happening pretty quickly as far as I'm concerned. I have not been encouraged covering this story for a long time, but I can tell you that I'm encouraged. And I'm hearing from a lot of sources on post that they are encouraged. And it's the loudest chorus of encouragement that I have heard in a very long time. So I hope that resonates with you, just because, I mean, it's spitting in the ocean sometimes with a story like this, with a problem like this. Does it feel overwhelming at times? Because it is, where do you even begin? Because there are so many parts of this that are broken.
Well, I do think that it's worth remembering that this began with good journalism. You and others in the Augusta area, but particularly your investigative team, had been shouting into the wind about this for a decade. And I'm sure that that was discouraging. To be reporting on conditions that were putting families at risk year after year after year and not seeing any progress. And based upon your work and based upon what I heard directly from families on post immediately after I was elected, I decided to make this a priority. And not just to pay lip service or hold a hearing and move on, but to give it the kind of sustained attention that it needs. So yes, we have seen in the last year, since I released the findings of my first investigation, that the Army is taking this much more seriously. But there are still really significant problems, and we are a long way from being in a place to declare victory. As I said today, this is ultimately about whether or not the United States is doing right by those who serve and defend. The service members who put it all on the line, especially our young junior enlisted personnel with young spouses and young kids. It's not right to treat them this way, and it undermines our national security by damaging morale, damaging retention, and damaging readiness. That's why I'm staying focused on this.
It's important you say that, because obviously as human beings, we should care about the health and safety of the people living in these homes. I mean, they're counting on us to make sure that they are safe. But as Americans, we should care, because these are the people who are keeping our country safe. And if they're distracted, that's a problem.
This is a moral question, and it's a national security question, and they're linked like this. When we are not treating people right, who have pledged their careers to defending all of us, we're in breach of our ethical obligations to them, and we are undermining our own national security. Right now, the U.S. Army is struggling to recruit at the numbers that we need to defend this nation. And when young soldiers have to worry that while they're on deployment, their spouse, their infant child, their school-age kids are suffering or being harmed because of the inadequacy of housing on post, that directly undermines our national security.
Those empty chairs were pretty poignant today. How disappointed are you that Balfour Beatty did not come to the literal table today?
Well, I think it damages their apparent commitment to transparency and responsiveness. You know, Balfour Beatty has been responsive to my staff's questions in private, and they have provided documents that we requested, but they refused to come today. When we had a Lieutenant General of the U.S. Army and the Assistant Secretary of the Army, in our open system of government, we've got to be able to have conversations like this in public. So it undermines my sense of their commitment to transparency. It undermines my confidence that they're taking this seriously enough. At the end of the day, results are what matter. What results have we seen since I unveiled my first investigation last year? We've seen a U.S. Army that is taking this much more seriously. We need to see sustained results from Balfour Beatty, and that means that they're doing right by the families who live on post at Fort Gordon.
Did it surprise you that they did not show up?
Look, I think that it undermined their claim to be maximally transparent and responsive to Congress. And I think it was a missed opportunity for them to tell the public and the Senate what steps they're taking to make this right. At the end of the day, we need this to work for the military families on post. It's going to come down to whether or not Balfour Beatty being held accountable by the Army and the Army being held accountable by me and Congress can fix what's broken. Because again, this isn't ultimately about what happens in rooms at the U.S. Capitol. It's about what happens in the bedrooms of 2-, 3-, and 4-year-old children on post at Fort Gordon. It's about Captain Shea, who testified last year at last year's hearing and showed us the rash that had been on his daughter's body, who described to us how his little girl had woken up in the middle of the night covered in blood because the home wasn't safe. This is about the 24-year-old military spouse whose husband or wife is out on deployment, who's scrambling to find a hotel room at midnight because there's sewage leaking into the child's bedroom. That's what this is about. That's why I'm going to stay focused on it. That's why the Army must stay focused on it, and I will hold them accountable to staying focused on it. And that's why Balfour Beatty has to shape up.
It's also important, too, that the Army looked inward, because this isn't just about Balfour Beatty. The Army identified some areas where the Army could do things better as well. And this isn't about a, shame on you that, you did something wrong. This is about how can we do better. This isn't about, who messed up here. It's about how do we move forward and make it better. So today, addressing some of the things that the Army could do better, I felt was especially important, because the military families know that it's not just looking at the privatized housing companies, it's also looking at the partnership that the Army has too, because the Army does have some responsibility in this. It is a partnership.
The Army has the power, authorities, and responsibilities to hold Balfour Beatty accountable to Balfour Beatty's obligations. And again, I have been encouraged that since I began my work and released my findings, the Army has suddenly sprung into action, investigated what's happening on post, investigated itself, as you point out, come voluntarily and engaged in public with me to discuss what needs to happen. But, at the end of the day, what matters is results for military families. That's true north here. And that's what we need to see from the Army and from Balfour Beatty.
A very important point you brought up, especially when we're talking about new construction. Pine Tree Terrace has been planned since April of 2021. We had the plans then and reported. So it's not a new housing development per se. It's been in the works for a while, but it's been just forever, you know, delay after delay after delay. It's good to hear that there is finally some forward progress with it. But there is that elephant in the room. How can we trust that a company that, as you pointed out, convicted of defrauding the military, has problem after problem after problem, maintaining the homes they already have? How do we make sure that we're not here a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, talking about these same problems in this new construction? And you asked the Army that, and they said, oh, we're aware of this now. We're doing a better job of making sure that this doesn't happen. But how do you think going forward we keep an eye on these new homes? Because you know as well as I do that it could be a domino effect, and we don't want this to happen. I mean, we want nothing more than Balfour Beatty and the Army to succeed.
Well, this is exactly the question that I put to General Vereen and Secretary Jacobson today. I don't doubt that they want to stay on top of it, but I think that that exchange revealed that the Army has some work to do to ensure that processes are in place to monitor the quality of this construction for all of the reasons you just mentioned. I'm worried about this. On the one hand, we need new homes on post. You know, we got 50-year-old homes with a lot of problems, and part of the solution here is new construction. On the other hand, the Army needs to define with more clarity and specificity how they are going to manage this construction project to ensure that it is not plagued by some of the same problems that now afflict the maintenance process.
What worries me about it, just after covering this for a decade, is Lakeview Terrace is the newest neighborhood at Fort Gordon, and Captain Cho, who testified about his daughter with the reptilian-esque skin because of her condition, he brought our stories to Balfour Beatty, and he told me this, and he said, how am I sure that you know, I'm not moving into this situation? And said, oh, we have fixed the problem. Those are in our older homes. You're moving into our officer homes. Those homes are newer and nicer. We don't have those problems there. They said that to him. So here we have new homes that I have the same concerns that you do, especially after when Captain Cho said that to me last year. I mean, we were sitting in an interview just like this. I almost fell out of the chair, knowing that new construction is planned for Fort Gordon, and Beatty telling him, you know, you're moving in new homes, you'll be fine.
New construction is needed.
Absolutely.
But the Army has an obligation to make sure that it is properly built. And I think they need to get more on top of that. And I think that the exchange we had at today's session revealed that. And it's a risk.
It's a risk, but I think that you have brought that up. You've said you're worried about it. The Army, it's on their radar, so to speak. Moving forward, it's not this, you know, magic wand of we have new homes, it's going to solve our problem. It's important moving forward that we know a brand new house isn't going to fix the problems that exist. But that conversation is happening, and that's what's important, and that's what's important about an oversight session like this one. Do you plan to have another one next year and next year and next year, or is that just kind of remaining to be seen based on, you know, what happens as the years go by?
Look, it'll depend upon what I think is necessary in order to do right by the families on post and to have the greatest impact that I can. Today, the Assistant Secretary and the General both committed to return to an event like this one, should I hold one. I am going to deploy my team's energy where I think it can have the most positive impact for the families on post. And what I can say with certainty is that, as I have consistently for the last 2 years, I am going to remain focused on this, I'm going to remain active on this, and I'm going to continue to do what I can within my power as a U.S. Senator to hold the Army accountable and Balfour Beatty accountable.
How do you think the inspections are going? I know you were at Fort Gordon last week, kind of personally overseeing them. How do you think that that's moving forward? Are you happy with it so far?
Well, yeah, I was on post last week to personally oversee the beginning of these new home-by-home inspections. I mean, this is a big deal.
Yeah, it is.
This is a big deal, and I want to emphasize that. We're talking about homes where, as we know, there are long-standing underlying maintenance concerns. There's been shoddy maintenance work done. Just getting this baseline data on the condition of every home on post is a big step forward. It's something I really emphasized to the Army last year they needed to do, and Fort Gordon is the first installation in the country to get this inspection. Look, I'm encouraged that it has begun. And I joined the Army on several of these inspections last week. I'm not going to judge the quality of the project until I have the data in hand, but I'm glad that they're making good on the commitment that they made to start this.
And a lot of other installations are looking at Fort Gordon. I mean, I hate to call Fort Gordon a guinea pig, but they're the first ones to go through this. They're the first ones to have these inspections. So every other installation is kind of looking at Fort Gordon. How does this go? What are they looking at? You know, and they're kind of setting the stage for how the rest of these inspections go.
Well, it's important for folks to know that these problems are not limited to Fort Gordon. And there are other installations across the country with similar issues, families going through similar things. And I think that the attention that we're focusing on Fort Gordon, I hope, will result in better management by the Army of similar projects at other bases across the country.
I don't have any other questions today. I know you're busy. Thank you for your time. But is there anything you want to say that I didn't ask you about?
As always, I want to hear from families on post. Concerns or reports of improvement. Just weigh in at ossoff.senate.gov. If you're living on post at Fort Gordon, let us know what you're experiencing, good, bad, or in between. It helps my team to continue our work on behalf of the families there.
Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you.